Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's class. And in today's class, we are going to continue from where we stopped when we were trying to test socket.io. And I remember that it wasn't working, and we tried to see why that it wasn't working as expected. And after the call, I just looked through the code and I was able to spot the issue, the error, right? Or not immediately after the call, but because something happened that I couldn't continue that day. So later on, when I looked at the code, I saw that there was something I didn't do well. So we would continue on that sockets.io. Then after that, we're also going to look at some other concepts like we'll see how we can do access token, refresh token, um, um, logic, and then we are going to also see some other things we can do. Yeah. So let's actually go to our VS Code and see what we can obtain from there. Okay, so we are here, and remember that this value here contained message and user ID, but here instead of using value.user ID, I used to.user ID, and this store was the issue, was the reason it wasn't working. So if I change this store to value.user ID, right, then this should work out. So if we start, can't remember, okay, npm run dev. So if we npm run dev, then someone asked, let me explain what this socket.join is. Now, this join is used to is used for two things. First, if you've created a room and you want to add a user to that particular room, right, you can use socket.join, right? So you see what the examples they are saying here. So you join, and then the room can be an array or a string. But then in this case, what we are just simply doing is this join is just basically pairing the ID, the socket assigns to that person that is joining to, okay, not so. Sorry. This sockets dot join here, right, is used to somehow pair the ID that sockets generate or generated with maybe the user's ID. So by right, I'm supposed to be passing maybe the user's ID here, but we are not actually using a user's ID, and this is not really necessary, right? This is not really necessary because this socket the ID is always going to map to the user that's just joined. Let's say, for example, if user A joins, right, this ID is always going to identify user A. If user B joins, this socket.id is always going to identify user B. So the only time you might want to use socket.join is if you don't want to refer to user A as the user with the ID socket generates. You then want to maybe use something else as the user's ID. So you can then say maybe socket.join, then that ID for that particular user that you want to use to refer to him. Okay, so I could do something like this. Instead of me saying okay, I could have a middleware to say, oh, okay, maybe I should use that middleware to generate an ID for a particular user or something like that. Okay, but that's not necessary. So for now, I'll just remove this sockets.id and then this is what I'll do. Save it, and then I would join user one, I would add user one, add user two, then look for a way to send user two, like you look for a way to make user one send user two a message. Okay. So yeah. I think I would go back to the other projects we used this sockets.join, and then I would also explain how I use it there later on. So I'm waiting for this. Okay, I think it has probably started up. So first I would join the first user. Wait, what is it saying? Okay, this port. Sorry. So let me disconnect that user. Let me restart this. Then let me try connecting again. So this is the first user, right? This is the first user's ID. Then let me connect the second user, which is user 2. Connected the second user. So this first user, right? So I think let me just stop sharing and share Postman now. So I just came here basically and connected user 1, user 2, and user 1 first before user 2, right? Then I would get the ID of user 2, right? Because it's user 2 I want to send a message to. I will get the ID of user 2. I've copied it already. I'll come to user 1. Then I want to send a greeting message, right? I want to send a greeting message to user 2. So here, this would be JSON. The first parameter is the user ID, which is that. Second one is going to be the message. Then remember, the second thing to do again is user 2 has to listen to the greeting event that user 1 is going to send. Okay, so let me send that to user 2. And you see user 2 has received that event. So user 1 emits an event, right, named hello to user 2, right? And then user 2 receives that hello event. Now, if user 2 wants to respond, remember that user 2 should also know of user 1's ID. So I'm going to copy user 1's ID. Come here, the message part, do the same thing. It's JSON. Come here, say user ID. User ID is going to be that ID, which is, so this ID here is the ID for this user 1 that is connected. Then I would say message. Message is maybe how are you? Now, for user 1 to get this message from user 2, user 1 needs to also listen to the greeting event. So I'll say greeting here, then I'll listen to that event. So now user 1 is also listening to a greeting event. So if user 2 sends that message now, user 2 emits that greeting event. You see, there's an acknowledgement that, or there's an indication here that, or a notification or a log that an event has been sent to, or an event has been emitted, a greeting event has been emitted, and this is the details of the greeting event. Then we come to user 1. User 1 now gets the how are you event. Now let's go back to VS Code and see what is actually going on in detail, right? Okay, now so let's explain what is happening. The first thing that happens is once I click on connect on Postman, right? What happens is that this is being automatically connected, right? Like what happens is there is a handshake that goes on between the client and the server. Okay. Then during that handshake, an ID is created for that particular client that joins. You get, because multiple clients can connect to the same uh, uh, sockets. So, and remember that is the communication is going to be bi-directional. So, since it's bi-directional, you should know who you want to emit an event to, a socket event to. You should be able to know who you're emitting an event to or not. Okay. So that's where this connection, this IO.connection works. Once there's IO.connection, this socket has to do with everything that particular user that is being connected owns. You get, so his ID is part of that. So once you say socket join or you connect, once you click connect, the handshake happens and then an ID is created for that particular person that connects. Then you can then start writing. So now connecting to IO, right? Connecting to the back end from the client is an event. Then emitting an event from the front end is also an event. So this is an example of emitting an event on the front end. This part, right? The event name is greeting, and sorry, this is an example of listening on an event. So anywhere you see sockets or io.on or socket.on is actually listening to an event. Okay, so if you don't listen to an event, when the event comes, you will not know. So this first part right here is to listen to a connection event. So there are some special events. For example, a connection event like this particular event. This is a connection event, and this happens when when a client is trying to connect with the server, right? Then we also have disconnect event. So you can say socket.on, then you can say on disconnect. On disconnect, you can decide to say maybe console.log by. Now, let me reveal something, Sha. When someone connects, right, you can actually go and update maybe let's say, for example, you're doing a chat kind of application, right? When they connect, you might want to go and update maybe on the database or wherever you're keeping their present status from offline to online. Once they disconnect, once there's a disconnection event, you use their ID to go and update that they are offline. You get, so you can use disconnect and connection to make that happen. Then you have your own custom events, like for example, custom listeners, right? Like once you write on, like, let's say on whatever you write here that is not disconnect or connect, right? You write your own. You can do whatever I want to do inside here for that particular event. So like here, what I did is once a greeting event comes, right? I just want to send that greeting event to the other user that is supposed to receive it. As simple as that. So I'm listening to a greeting event that is coming from user A. Once the greeting event comes, I can decide to do whatever I want to do here. And after doing whatever I want to do, I then emit the event to maybe user 2. Or if this was maybe a group or something, I can emit it to all the users in that group or to the room to emit it to that room. So socket.to is used to to specify who you want that event to be emitted to. And this accepts what it accepts either a string or an array of strings, and the string should be the ID of whoever you want to emit your event to. Then this emit is actually what emits the event, right? And then you emit an event with the event name, right? Right, this like the event name and then the value for the event. And the value for this event could be anything. Could be an object, could be an array, could be anything actually. Okay. So if this was a real life chat application that you're building using socket.io, at this point, you would want to save the user's detail, the user's chat. Maybe you want to save it on the database somewhere, say, oh, chat, save this chat and then do this with this, or maybe save the chat before emitting it to the other user. So that means if this particular user that you're emitting, like the second user you're emitting this greeting event to is not online, you know that you've already saved it on a database and that data will not be lost. So if the user 2, for example, comes online later on, maybe the user 2 can see that's if you saved on a database too before emitting it to that user. So do you guys follow? Is there anybody that, so for people that are just joining, that didn't join when I started, right? What was written here before was to.userid, and there was no variable name to that we declared anywhere. That's why this whole thing was failing. So, but we changed this from to.value because value contains the user ID and the message. So it's working well now. And in fact, what some people do here is, what some people actually do most times is they actually can create a controller, or you can call it controller or event manager. You can say maybe controller here, then it's a greeting controller. So the greeting controller now would do everything that you're supposed to do here. There are options, right? The options you might want to use. You might want to say, so maybe this greeting controller, what you might want to do here is to function greet so this could have maybe a value, and then say guru.export equals to greet. Then here, maybe you can save to your MongoDB, for example. Maybe you can save to your MongoDB, whatever I want to do here. But then at the end of the day, you then want to do something like this. You'd say first greet should be equals to require, then you say /controller/greet controller. Then you might want to call this here. In fact, you might want to call this and still return value again. Maybe you might want to, after you've done or maybe saved, processed, stroke saved the data on a database, right? After that, you might want to just return value again, right? Why you might even want to return this again might be so that you can do something like maybe let value equals greet, and then you can use this one value here and here instead of using this one. It all depends on you, right? Maybe this could be an await. Right, so we'll remove this part. You might just leave it like that. Let it be an await. So this would then be an async. Right? This would be an await. Async, sorry. Right? You might remove this. So once this event is emitted from front end and the back end receives that event, so call this greet to do a couple of tasks. Then after doing those couple of tasks, it will then emit this message finally to whoever it's supposed to emit it to. Right? Some people, I think I've seen a situation where someone did something like this. Someone said socket and value. So since you're passing sockets inside this grid, you can actually also use this in here. You can actually just say socket, but then here you have sockets and value that way. So since you passed sockets in here, like the sockets, you pass it in here, right? You're giving this grid function the ability to emit socket.io values, right? Or you're giving the ability to emit events, right? But personally, I've not tried this. So I can't say for sure if it works. I don't know. Let me just see. Let me try it and see if it will work. So I've connected user 1, I've connected user 2. Let me try to copy user 2 and emit that event. Okay, so what did it say? Okay, it said greet is not a function. So I think it's because I didn't save this part. I didn't save that. So I'll connect user 1 again, connect user 2, come back to user 1. Let me copy this. You can just see, test it here. So wait, this is user 2. Sorry, I'm supposed to copy user 2, then come to user 1, paste user 2 there, send the greetings, and yeah, and user 1, sorry, and user 2 has gotten the greetings. Let me show you actually from here. Let me show you from Postman. So let me say hello user 2. Send that event, come to user 2. User 2 receives the hello user 2. So, which means this is also valid, right? What I did here is also valid. In fact, the await is not really supposed to be there because I don't think there's nothing we are actually awaiting here, right? The only time you might want to await inside here is if you're maybe querying a database and the database uses async await, you might want to await and the rest. But if I remove this async and I remove the await and async here, it will still work fine. So I've shown you how you can, so now instead of having bulk code written inside your socket, like you have bulk code written in socket, like instead of having your greet function here, what we're supposed to write in your greet function, you now write it directly, inside here, and you're making your code very bulky. You can actually group your code. Like for example, the way I just did, I could just say, maybe this is greeting events. Then maybe if there's any other event I want to do, I just write it here, socket dot on, then write my events there. And this thing could even take up just one line of code rather than making it multiple lines. So it could look more like a route. Maybe if I have another event, I'll just do this, something like this. Then maybe the value, maybe v2, value 2, value 1. Then function here, sorry, await whatever I want to do here. The function I want to call in here, right? I could have more and more and more and more. And maybe if there's another one, maybe another group of events that I want. Maybe this one event, all these events are for chats. Then maybe they are events for notification or something like that. I could just say sockets dot on, maybe notification. Then, then I just label this maybe notification events, right? Greeting events, maybe for all this would be like greeting events, while maybe notification events like this. So, but you know that when you're calling whatever you're calling here, you're calling it from maybe the controller. So you can have maybe a controller for the greetings, like maybe greetings controller. For notification, maybe you could create another new file here. You call it notification controller.js, which will handle everything, which will have all the functions that notification would be using, right? So does it make sense to you guys? Does it make sense? Is there anybody that is confused, still confused? Anybody? Everybody following? If you can follow, just say yes on the chat section. Let me know that you're following. Okay, nice. Okay, so this is a simple way to handle socket.io, right? You can use this way. So it's not that difficult. It's not difficult. So your greet, right? This line here that you wrote is like equivalent to saying ras.send. I mean that ras.send we used to do in a when we were writing express, ras.send. So this line is equivalent to ras.send. And another thing that makes socket.io different is that you can, have you noticed that when we were writing our socket.io, we didn't used to send response twice for a particular request. We didn't send response twice. Like any response we send that was not the default response, like the default success response would be in an if statement. So if that if statement executes, it doesn't continue. But with socket.io, I can send this event 5 times. In fact, let me do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll save it. I'll go back and I'll connect user 1. I'll connect user 2. And then what is user 2's? Okay, so this user 2's ID. I'll come back to user 1. and I'll emit that event to user 2. Then, so let me stop sharing and share my VS Code. I'm sorry, my Postman. Have you seen this? Right? I just sent an event once to user 2. I sent an event once to user 2, but user 2 receives 5 of that events. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. User 2 receives 5 events from that user. So this sockets.io allows you to send even multiple events. Like you can send multiple events back to the client rather than just sending one, right? So that's another usefulness or advantage of sockets.io. So I just did this for illustration purpose. Yeah. Yeah. So now you can apply this knowledge you've gotten from here to the other project. In fact, so let me open the other project and then let me start explaining what happened in the other project. So you know that other project is a little bit heavier than this one. This one is just this one I just did here is just to explain how sockets.io works. So if you want to configure a database, you can actually do it. Maybe you can install MongoDB here. You can do your configuration somewhere here and start calling the server. Maybe do something like I don't really want to go in deeply to start configuring the database and everything. But let's go back. So let me crash the server and let's go back to the other what's it back end that we wrote. Okay, so sorry. See. Okay, so let's come back to this one and let me start explaining. Okay, so the first thing you notice is we had ioserver.use. Okay, before we even go there, remember that what we did here was that, Express has its own server that it can run on. And we know that sockets.io also has a server that it can run on. Okay. Now, what we did was we passed Express to a default HTTP server. If you notice, this HTTP server is coming from a package, an internal package named HTTP. So you don't need to now do npm install HTTP. HTTP comes automatically with Node.js. Okay, so you just do require HTTP and it will work. So there's create server, right, in HTTP. So we are creating a server using this Express, and then that server we've created with Express, we are passing that server again into IO. So this server we created with HTTP, we are still passing it again to socket.io, right? And then what we just did here is what we are telling socket.io is we are going to allow these methods, right? For either IO server or for Express, we are going to accept these methods and we are going to accept any origin. This asterisk here is a wildcard. It means any origin, right? And we created that server, right? So anything that you have to do, right, in terms of spinning up a server, you would reference this IO server. That's why at the very bottom, if you notice, okay, sorry, did I use HTTP server? Okay, sorry. Anytime you want to spin up your server, you're going to use HTTP server. But if you want to refer to IO, you're going to use IO server, this IO server. Now, this HTTP server makes it possible for Express and sockets.io to run on the same port, right? On the same port, but they are different services. So without that, right, without configuring it this way, without this line of code here, right, this what we just did here, you might want to start, or you would want to start Express on a different server and maybe IO, right? Express on a different port and IO on a different port. But with this setup now, you can start both on the same port. Then the next thing we did was we created a middleware, right? And this middleware just checks. Of course, you know what the middleware does now. It checks if you are actually authorized, if you have an authorization header. If you have an authorization header and it is valid, then we are going to decode that authorization header. Remember this part, right? This part decodes that authorization header. It verifies it and it passes the value it gets from the payload of this particular JSON web token to this variable, right? This variable that we created. So auth. So we have socket.handshake.auth, right? Dot decoded. This decoded is not like this. So let me explain. This auth is just an object. So whatever variable name you want to create inside the auth, you can actually create it. But make sure that the same variable name you're using is the same variable name you would use here. See? So if I used sockets.handshake.auth.user details, then here when I want to reference that same variable, I'll say socket.io.handshake.auth.user details, right? And also here. So we created that middleware for authentication, right? So which means you can have your normal login and register routes using Express, but if you want to connect to socket.io, you might need to send, while you're trying to create your connection, right? You might need to send this, and this is valid. So let me explain a scenario. Let's take, for example, you're creating a chat app, right? So now, the components that will hold your login and register and maybe other components that don't need socket.io, those ones, the components holding those particular pages will not have anything to do with like socket.io. But maybe once the user is logged in and the user now sees like the component that is supposed to maybe show the chat, that's when you now send a request to socket.io to connect to the back end. To connect to socket.io so that you can start receiving events. That way, once you land on that particular page, you're already authenticated. So let me still give another example. Take for example, you're designing a site that has a dashboard. And then the dashboard, once you're logged in and you view the dashboard should show notifications, for example. So that dashboard layout will have a place where it will automatically, as soon as the dashboard is loading, it should send a request to connect to sockets.io. Do you get? So once it connects to sockets.io, because before you can view the dashboard, it means you're logged in. So that's another scenario where you want to use socket. So socket.io, you might not want to implement login or register using socket.io. You just have this middleware, while Express takes care of the rest. So you have sending a message. So I just use this to remember, and also remember that we also did something. I remember I showed something here. I said I could actually make it possible for any of these routes, right, to emit an event on behalf of socket.io. So I don't really need to, what I wrote here makes it possible for me to emit an event without being inside this code, right? Without being inside here. It allows the backend to emit events. Okay, so which means with this setup, socket.io will have to will just emit events without any authentication or anything. As far as you wrote in any controller that it should emit an event to a particular user, it will just emit that event. So which means the security and everything would have to do with Express, while socket.io just only emits events. So I just said here, what I did was request dot, remember that request is an object, the same way response is an object. So I just said request dot socket. So I'm creating a new property in request named socket. So I just say request dot socket should be equals to IO server. Okay. So that automatically creates this property in the request object and then assigns it to this IO server. Then I call next so that every other thing can go on well. Then anywhere that I want to, in any of these controllers, right? Let's take, for example, this to-do route, maybe let's say when I'm adding a new to-do, if I want to refer to that socket.io, all I need to do is req dot socket. Now this req dot socket is already the socket, right? Then I can then say dot to. Then I put the user ID that I want that event to be emitted to, then dot emit. Then I'll put in the event name, and then here could be the event value. This could be an object. Maybe I'll say maybe event value. So with this now, right? Event name, event value, automatically, this is going to be emitted, while you, as a person that made the request, will get your own response, right? But the other person that is supposed to receive the event will receive the event. Okay. And also, I was trying to explain to someone yesterday that if you don't want to maybe use something like maybe Redis to track, maybe you want, let's take for example, you're building a platform and you want it that maybe you as the admin suspends a user, the user should be suspended in real time, right? As far as that user is logged in. Maybe if the user is not logged in, then the user will try to get an access token, right? And then in the process of getting that access token, of course, but if the user is logged in already and you want to suspend the user automatically, you can have a sockets.io that once maybe the suspend route is being called, you emit a suspend event to the user. Once the user gets that, once the front end, like, or the mobile app or whatever gets that event, it just automatically, logs out the user or something, or maybe deletes the token, the access token on the front end, and logs out the user. So that's like another scenario, another way to also handle that. That's another way to handle it. So, which means you might create a suspend event, maybe something like this. Maybe you can call it suspend event. You call it suspend event this way. Then you emit that suspend event. Then on the front end, you say you listen to the suspend event. Once it happens, then you know what to do. You log out the user and do one or two things. Yeah, so that's the explanation. So let's still come back here. Then what I just did is, since the socket.id, no doubt, but I don't want to be using socket.id to refer to that particular user. So rather, I want to be using the user's ID from the decoded string, which was created from the database, right? I want to use that user ID to refer to the user. So that's why I now use this join. So this join is more like saying, okay, for this particular sockets.id, right? Kind of pair this socket.id to this user.id so that anytime we are emitting to this user.id, right, it can map to this socket.id automatically and send that request. But this join can also be used if you have rooms, like maybe if you want to broadcast message to a particular room. In fact, that's the main logic self behind this thing. You adding the user ID like this is like saying this user himself is a room. So if you add 5 users, if you like use socket.join on 5 users, it's like saying you've created 5 rooms where those 5 users are actually the name of the room. Like those 5 user IDs are the name of the room. So if you emit to that particular room, it will emit to that user. But if you want to create rooms, right? If you go through sockets.io documentation, you'll see where you can create rooms, and then you see use socket.join to add people to a particular room, right? This is how it's being done there. I think you pass the room name and the number of users that you want to add there. I can't really remember, but you can go through that documentation. Then this send message here is just basically socket.io, right? Me listening to a send message event from the front end, and then I'm calling this send message function. Now, this is another way of doing it, right? Instead of maybe writing an arrow function, then passing the value and socket, you can do it this way. You write your send message, and then outside here, right? Since this send message automatically has like a payload, if there's a payload passed to it, definitely the payload will. This is more like how we did callback functions now. If you guys remember how we wrote callback functions, where if they are arguments and you're using your callback function, you don't need to really pass the arguments. For example, here, this place you're writing auth. This place is more like saying you have REQ, RES, next, something like this, right? But there's no need of you writing it this way, right? You just write it this way already, and those other arguments will automatically be passed to it, right? So you send a message, you have a payload, and then now what we are doing here is we are using, so another problem is we're not supposed to use sockets. The only way we can actually use sockets here is if we pass sockets, maybe something like this, and maybe we call it or. Okay, so let me complete it. So maybe you have socket like this, and then you have something like this. Then you say send message. Of course, this would be payload here. Then you now say send message. You now say, now the socket I'm writing here is this particular socket here that I'm passing here, while the payload here is this payload that I'm passing here. So you might want to do it this way, or if you just want to pass the payload, then what you might want to do here is, remember that we have a way of emitting events here, right? Oh, sorry, you cannot use this actually. So you would use IO server. So in here, you rather say IO server dot. So if you write to, it brings out. So you say IO server dot to dot payload dot to the payload contains to and message. So you say IO server dot this dot emit send message and whatever, and then it is going to send or emit that message, right? But now it's emitting that message not using this particular socket object, but it is using the one you directly created here to send that event. So, but now, right? So now I know someone might have this question. So what's the difference between this IO server and this other socket, right? This IO server is general, like it doesn't know whoever is making in fact, this particular one, right, is mainly used for connection. Once you connect, then this socket here, right, is used to, how do I put it? This is used to identify, or this would have, this socket here would have the details of a particular person that is sending an event, right? That's why you can always have the socket.id from here. You can always like extract the ID and do whatever you want to do with it. So so that's the main difference between, but both of them, right? This socket here and this IO server, both of them can emit events. I think this one can listen. So let me just write dot on. Yeah, IO server can also listen. In fact, that's why you have IO dot on here, right? So you can listen, right? But here is an instance of socket.io, right? I think you can create like multiple instances of this server, right? IO server. I think you can create multiple instances, but with different namespace. So I don't want to go into namespacing though. I don't really want to go into that. So, but that's like something you can research on your own. Is what is called namespacing in socket.io. Okay. So so what did we even do here again? We made it possible to send a message, right? We made it possible to send a message and the rest. And so let's come here and see what we did. So first, before we even go to the message, before we even start explaining this message and chat model, we should understand what models we created. So we created a messages model and we created a chat model, right? So let me start with the chat model, right? Now, this chat model is equivalent to friends list. So, you know, that list of people, like when you, for example, when you log into WhatsApp now, you see a list of people that you can click to chat with, right? So that is what I would have named this friends list. Maybe I would have named this maybe friends list model rather than chat model. Maybe this chat model is maybe confusing, but this is like a friends list. And what does the friends list contain? It contains your ID, which is your own ID. It contains the ID of the other person which you're chatting with, and this the other person is the ID that you're going to populate so that you will see who you're chatting with. You know, okay, now this person that they chat with, like, and you know this is dynamic. So if the person's profile picture changes, of course, this is referencing that user, so it will get the updates, right? Then the last message ID is the last message, the ID of the last message, either you sent to the person or that person sent to you. Okay, so this last message ID is, so as soon as you send a message, you should save, once you save the message on the database, you should get the ID of that message and then update the chat with the ID of that message. So you can always show the last, you know, on WhatsApp, right? If someone sends you a message, right, you can view it on from the chats. You see, okay, this person sent a message or something. So that's where this last message ID comes in. Then this contains files is used to know, does this particular message contain a file, like you know, But this is not really necessary, because from this message ID, this message, if it contains a file, right? As you're referring to the message, you will see if it contains a file or not. So, but this contains files. Like for example, you want to save that, okay, this particular message contains a file, and maybe you want to show an icon, while the user is doing his friends list. Maybe, if someone sends you a write-up with a picture on WhatsApp, for example, it will show you the write-up, then it will show like an icon to show you that this message is coming with a picture. So that's why I put this there. Okay, I hope you guys are following. Is there anybody that is missing out? If you are following, please say I am following on the chat section. If you are following. Okay, cool. So Matilda is following. Who else is following? I hope other people are following. Kingsley, you're following. All right. Nice. Okay. So this is for the chat. Now, this chat is you're going to make this chat, like you're going to create two of it, because remember that you have a chat with this person, and this other person, when he's also viewing his list of chats, needs to have a chat with you. To show if I have a chat with Kingsley, and if Kingsley wants to show those two. Okay. Then the messages also acts in like a similar way. So now look at the message. The message has the user IDs. So now the user IDs is an array, and the array would contain the IDs of the two people that are chatting. In fact, this user IDs, it contains the IDs of the two people that are chatting, right? Then this sender is going to be the person that sent the message. Remember that this is now we've gone to the message schema or the message model. So the users that are chatting, right? Then you want to save the sender's ID. So the sender's ID is the person that sent that message. Okay, so that if the sender's ID is your own ID, you know that you're the one that sent this message. Well, if the sender's ID is the other person's ID, you know that it's this other person that sent this message. But these are like the chats between both of you. Then this is where you have the message itself, the message that either you is sending to that person or the other person is sending to you. Then these files here is an array of strings, which is an array of the files that either you is sending to the other person or the other person is sending to you. So these files, once on the front end, the person clicks send, you will first upload the files to maybe Cloudinary or AWS. You upload the files there, then the links to the files will come back, and then that's the link you will send alongside that message to be saved in the files array. Are you guys still following, or is it confusing now? Okay, so Matilda is asking, in the chat model, the other person was also the ID of the person you chatted with. Is that similar to is that similar to one of the user's IDs? So I don't really understand the question, but so let's take, for example, I and Matilda, we are chatting. These user IDs will contain my ID and Matilda ID in any order. It can, so if this would contain Matilda ID, Matilda's ID, then it will contain my ID, right? For this user ID, irrespective of who sends the message, whether I'm the one that sends the message to Matilda, this user ID will contain two of our IDs. If Matilda is the one sending me message, this user IDs will contain the two IDs that are chatting. And that is important because if I'm viewing the chat between me and Matilda, I don't want to only see my own chats or only Matilda's chat. I want to see the chat that me and her had, irrespective of who sent it. You understand? Who sent the chat between two of us? I want to see all. So this will help me when I'm querying. So I want to query where the user ID, the user IDs contains my own ID and the ID of Matilda. So that will now bring out all the messages that me and Matilda have maybe been sending. While this sender ID here just tells who sends the message, because you know that on WhatsApp, if you're the one that sends the message, that message will appear on the right. But if the other person is the one that sends the message to you, right, it will appear on the left. So this sender now is what you will use to align the message. When all the message comes in, right, you will then use this sender to align the message. You'll now be checking if the sender ID is your own ID. It means you are the one that sent that message. But if the sender's ID is not your own ID, it means it is another person that sent that message. This sender ID will also help if you want to edit a message. So that you won't be able to edit the other person's message. It's only your own message you'll be able to edit. Okay, that's like a more advanced stuff. But in the basic use of this sender IDs to identify who sent the message between two of you, or if it's a group chat in the whole group, right? Who is the sender of this message, right? Then the message and the files. So I don't know. Okay, so let's go back to the chat model though. So you were saying, let me see, the other person. Okay, I think I'm finally understanding your question. So this other person, so let's take, for example, me and Matilda, we are chatting. This me will be my own ID, while the other person here will be Matilda's own ID. Then I will also create a chat on the back end where the me will be Matilda and the other person will be my own ID. Matilda, does it make sense to you now? Does it make sense to you? Okay, so why that is so is, now, do you notice, let me still use WhatsApp as an example. If I delete your own chat on my own end, it won't disappear from your own end. Do you notice that thing? If maybe I hold your name, like I hold your name and I click delete chat, and then I delete the chat, it will only delete in my own friends list. But you, on your own list, you will still be seeing me on your list, right? Why? That's because on the database, between me and you, we have unique chats. So the unique chat here is when we are creating a message, right? We will check if we have like chats. So let me break it down this way. Let's take, for example, I am Matilda. We've not chatted before. Maybe I've built a chat application, and then me and Matilda, we've not chatted even for once. And then I send Matilda a message. Hello, Matilda. Now, what will happen? What the logic that's supposed to happen is, first, you create the message, right? After creating the message, you want to check, is there a chat between me and Matilda before? If there is no chat between me and Matilda before, create a chat where the value of me is my own ID. That's Victor's ID, my own ID. While the other person's, which is Matilda, the ID of the other person will be the Matilda's ID. Then also check, has Matilda chatted with me before? Like, is there any message between me and Matilda before? Like, or is there any chat between me and Matilda before? If there is a chat between me and Matilda, also create another chat where the ID of the me is Matilda, and the ID of the other person is Victor's ID. That way, if Matilda one day wakes up, maybe as a result of mood swing, she wakes up and hold my chat and delete it, I will still have her on my own list, even if she doesn't have me on her own list. Then if I send her a message, that logic will come again. That logic will now check, do I have a chat with Matilda already? Right? I have a chat with Matilda. So it will not create me as my own ID and the other person as Matilda. But then when it checks, does Matilda also have a chat with me? Matilda doesn't have any chat with me. It will now create a chat where me is Matilda and the other person is Victor. Does it make sense to you guys now? Does it make sense? Any other person who is finding it confusing? Who is finding it confusing? Does it make sense to any other person also? Does it make sense? So I'm thinking of a scenario I can use to break this thing down. I'm thinking of a scenario where I can use to break it down. You know, I'm thinking of that scenario. I'm thinking of a scenario. Okay, take for example your school receipts. Take for example your school receipts, right? When you make payment to your school, when you make a school fee payment, they write you a receipt. They also keep a record of, the payment. Abi? So there's like a duplication. You have the receipt, and they also have a proof of payment on their own end, right? So if your own receipt goes missing, you can get a proof of payments from their own list, from the school's list that you've paid for something, right? Even if your receipt goes missing, right? And vice versa. Although that vice versa might not really work out, they could tell you, okay, their list got missing, and then everybody that has receipts for this thing should bring it, and then they can use that to create another list. It's somehow similar scenario. So if I've chatted with you, I should have a chat where I am the ID and you are the person that is chatting with me, or the person I'm chatting with. And you two should also have the same thing. You get? So that's the scenario. So now that is what I'm trying to check here. Now, if you come here to messages, if you come here, where is our controller? Message router. Now, that is what I'm trying to do here. That is exactly what I'm trying to do here. Now, let me explain it. Let's take, for example, me and Matilda, right? I'm sending a message to Matilda, right? What I'm doing now, the first thing once I send a message to Matilda is I create that message. I first create that. I don't want, I don't check if, so now, in real life scenario, you might want to check if Matilda blocked me. You might want to check if Matilda blocked. If Matilda blocked me, then you might want to not create this message for Matilda to see, because Matilda blocked me from sending messages to her. Do you get? You might want to do this. Okay, but we are not checking that. We are just saying as soon as you send a message, create the message, right? But after creating the message, now check if me, right? If I have a chat with Matilda, check if there is a chat where my ID is, where the ID of the me is my own ID and the person I'm chatting with is Matilda. Okay? If I don't have a chat with Matilda, create that chat for me. Create that chat. That's where the me, the value of me is my own ID and the value of the other person is Matilda. Okay? Then the last message ID is this message that we just created, the ID. Then if the value of these files, like the length of these files, remember that these files is supposed to come as an array of strings, which are the strings to the picture, right? If the array of files coming from front end is greater than 0, then this contains files should be true. But if it is, so of course, if it is 0, like, and 0 is not greater than 0, so this would be false. But if it contains files, which means the value of files is greater than 0, then this will become true. Now, what we are saying here is if we did not have, I did not have any chat with Matilda before, create it. But if I already had a chat with Matilda, okay, then this is what should happen. Just find that chat ID. Find that chat ID, right? And then update the last message, the ID of the last message, so that it will show the last message, you know. Do you get, like, it will show the last message for that particular chat, so that if I'm going to view a list of chats, I'll see the last message. I can populate this last message ID to show the last message so that I can view it. Then also, I'm also checking, does Matilda have a chat with me? That's why I'm not checking. If the me is Matilda and the to is Victor that is chatting with Matilda, okay? Then if Matilda doesn't have any chat with me, then also go and create a chat between Matilda and me. But if there's already a chat between Matilda and I, then what you should just do is do this. Create, update the existing chat between Matilda and I, like update the last message. Okay? Okay. So I'll still go over it again. Let's take for now, let me flip it. Let's take, for example, me and Matilda have not chatted before, and Matilda sends me a message first, right? Once Matilda sends me that message first, I want to save that message first. I just want to save it. Then after saving that message, I want to check, does Matilda have any chat with me before now? If the answer to that is no, that Matilda has not had any chat with me before, then I'll create a chat between Matilda and I. So where the user ID, that is the me, is going to be Matilda, while the person Matilda is chatting with will be me. Then I'll do this last message and everything. But if Matilda already has a chat with me, then that chat ID, I will just update the last message ID to the new message I just sent. Then also I want to check, as Matilda is sending this message to me, do I have a chat with Matilda already? Right? That's what I'm now checking. So Matilda is sending the message to me, but I'm also, the backend is also checking, do I have a chat with Matilda? If I don't have a chat with Matilda, create a chat where the to is me that Matilda is sending the message to, and then the other person is Matilda, right? Then also do this. But if I already have a chat with her, then just update the last scene for that particular chat ID, or for that particular chat. Now, does it make sense? Does it make sense to everybody? Do you people understand how this concept works now? Is there anybody that is still confused? Is there anybody that is not getting it? Okay, so I'm happy that you guys are finally getting it, because I know that was something that was quite confusing to explain, or that was quite complex to explain and understand like ASAP. Okay, so that was what I was doing. Then you can get a list of charts. So now charts, I'm saying when you're getting charts, because I can have a different chart list from you, you understand, and the rest. So I'm getting charts where me is my own, where the value of me is my own ID. But I want to know the details of the other person I'm chatting with. So that's why I'm populating the other person here. Then I want to also see the detail of the last message that was sent. I don't even know why I removed this created at and updated at, but you can use this to show the time the last message was sent from the chat. You can use this to show it. That's if you want to. And the rest. And so on and so forth. There's something I didn't say, right? There's something I didn't remember to say. You see this disconnect. So you see this disconnect. Now, with this disconnect, you can actually do something. You can actually maybe on the users, let's take for example, you can have something like this. See, where is it? The users route, no, not router. On the users controller, on the user schema, sorry. You can have something like this. You can have something like this. Last seen is going to be a date, and the default is going to be null. Okay, so like you see that last seen thing that they used to do in WhatsApp, that last seen a minute ago or 2 minutes ago, or last seen 3:45 and the rest, the time and the date, right? This last seen now, you can come here and say, once any user disconnects, you might want to say await user model dot update. Then you know that the decoded ID is the user ID of the user that just left. So you can then say decoded dot user ID. Is it find one and update? Then you can then say last seen. The last seen should be new date. Bagan, short and simple. With this line of code, you've updated, once the user disconnects, you update his last seen on the database. And then anybody that is viewing that user, as far as that user is not online, the person can actually see the last seen. So on the front and that's so the showing of the users, whatever last seen is up to the front end. The front end can decide to so if the user is online, that if the status of that user, if it receives an event that user is online, you understand, then show online. But if the user's status is offline, then instead of showing offline, query the backend to get the last seen of this particular user. You can even make you can do a lot of things. You can even decide that once the disconnect, after when you do this last scene, you want to socket.to. You want to send an event to everybody, every of the user IDs friends. Then you want to emit the last scene, right? You can do something like this: last scene, let last scene equals to new date. And then you can just use last seen here. And then you also emit maybe last seen event. Then this could be the user ID, and the last seen value. So once you do this, right, and you emit it to all this person's friend, this user ID will be used by the front end to go and look for that user. Then once that user is being spotted, the last seen of that particular user can be updated on the front end. So that's another feature. Matilda, I've seen your question. So I've understood the me and the other person, but I'm still hung up on the user's ID on the messages. Why do I need that? Okay. When those are already on the chat model. Okay, so yeah, I get your question. So let's come back here. Let's come back to the messages. Now, you have, if you don't have, let's take for example, you don't have these user IDs, right? Let's take for example, you don't have it. I know you have the me and the other person here on the chat model, but how will you know messages that were sent between these two people? Because you don't just want to load all the messages. Imagine that I click to view messages that me and Matilda have been sending, but then when I click on Matilda, I see all the messages I've sent to any of the contacts that I have on my list. It will not make any sense, right? It will not make any sense because you cannot just use send. Okay, for example, if you're the sender, who are you sending the message to? You just have sender, finish. And if you say you want to have sender and receiver, well, that could work. If you said maybe you have something like maybe you have sender, you have receiver, like this. Maybe you have maybe recipient. I don't know if I think that should be the correct spelling of that. Yeah, this could still work. So this would mean that if you're doing it this way, this would mean that your query is going to change a little bit, right? So your query will look something like this. You say message model, right? I'm just using this as an example. Message model dot find. So you say message model dot find, then your query will look like this. You then say or where you say where the sender, please come up, give me a suggestion. Where the sender is your user ID, right? I don't know how to represent this. Let me just say req.decoded.user ID, and then where the recipient is the other person's user ID, and you can get the two from here, like from the chat model, where the other person is maybe the two, or the recipient can be the other person. Okay, where the sender ID is this, or where the sender ID, or where the sender is the other person, and the recipient ID is you, right? This is how, if you're going by this pattern that you have sender and you have recipient, right? You might want to do this. This is what you would write. You want to get you want to find messages where the sender is you and the recipient is the other person, or the sender is the other person and the recipient is you. Okay, but the reason why, so now, of course, this will work perfectly well, right? It's okay. Once these messages come, you just check if the sender, right? If the sender ID is your own ID, then it means you're the one that sent the message. But if the sender ID is not your own ID, then it means it's the other person that sent the message. This will work perfectly well. But in a scenario, right? In this scenario where I'm not using recipient, right? I'm just using only sender, like, and user IDs. The query would look something like this. The query would be like this. So this would be message model.find, and then message model.find, and then what I'm just simply going to write here is find where user IDs is in, where user IDs is in RAQ dot decoded dot user ID and recipient. So what I'm saying is find all the message where the user ID contains exactly this user ID and this recipient in any order. But as far as the value of the user IDs contains the user ID and the recipient, which means is between this message was between you and this particular person, right? Or let me say, instead of recipient, I'll say find messages where the user IDs are the user ID and the other person. Like take this logic to be like, for example, you're sitting down in a conference. Two people can sit down in a conference, right? But one person can talk first and the other person can talk second. But two people are the two people that are sitting down in the conference. So querying for those two people would be like this, right? So now, one thing I want to say and to let you understand this, your logic is your logic. Someone can come and implement the message model this way. It's fine. It meets the bottom line is, does it meet the need of the client that you're building for, or does it meet your need if you're building it as your own company? Does it meet your need? Does it satisfy its purpose? Right? Does the code satisfy the purpose for that particular feature? If it satisfies it, then you can continue. But if it doesn't satisfy it, then you have to rethink about the structure. So if you're doing this, right, if you want to query like this, then you know that you need to have like a receiver, right? But if you're going to structure your messages like this, then you know that definitely you need to have, you need to make this query this way. I hope I'm clear on that. Is there any question? Matilda is not on the call currently. Is there any question from what I've explained so far? Any question? Okay, so since there's no question, So since there's no question, right, we can actually move on to something else. Okay. So the next thing we are going to talk about is how to further break your controllers into like maybe services and the rest. So now, right, let's look at this. Let's pick one of these. Let's pick one of these. So we have add a new to do, right? Now, now one thing you notice is that this add a new to do, right, is the controller, right? And this add a new to do, I'm writing the logic directly in here, right? Which is not bad, but it makes it difficult for me to reuse this add a new to do somewhere else. Let's take for it. So at the scenario that I can explain this would be a bit should I say might be a little bit difficult to relate, but I think I should still try to explain it. So let's take for example, there's another endpoint that uses this add a new to do, but it doesn't send the front end doesn't send the title and description in the body, or it sends it, maybe sends it as a query or a parameter, or it sends it in a different way. You would be tempted to write this new to do all over again, but then you just change the input that is coming in, right? But is that a cool way to go about it? No. A better way to go about it would be to do this, to create what is called maybe a service. In fact, there's this other paradigm of okay, let's not go there yet. Now, what we have here is more like an MVC pattern, right? So you have your models, which is the schema. You have your controllers, which are in the controllers folder, which are in this controller folder. Then your view is kind of your router. Your view is supposed to be the front end, like where users actually interact with. But since this is an API you're building, your view is actually these points where there's an endpoint, and then there are parameters they have to pass. So this is where the users interact with. This is where not the users, this is where your application the front end applications interact with. So this is kind of like the view for the front end applications that are interacting with the back end, right? This is the view. While this place where the logics are, right, for each of the view is the controller, and then the schema is the model. So you have like an MVC pattern: model, view, and controller. There's the other one called DDD, is it domain driven? I can't remember the full name. Yeah, just you can research on DDD. I can't remember what's the full meaning of that. I think it's domain-driven development. Oh, I can't remember. Let me not. But I think that's it. If I'm not mistaken. So, but if you're doing MVC and you still want to break down things into services, then this is what you might do, right? So instead of having a controller and having services again, instead of having controllers like this way and then writing your logic inside the controller, for example, where is it? Oh, sorry, this controller, let's say for example, this to-do controller now, instead of having that, right, in that way, what you might want to do, what you might want to do would be to further break these controllers into services. So this, I'll break down the controllers into services and show you how they work. So now you can have, let me just close this so that it doesn't really maybe confuse you. So this is what we might do. We might have a new folder and we call it services, right? Then you might have you can have something like, you can have maybe like to-do service, or so one thing is you might actually want to okay, I wouldn't want to break this down into like a lot of files again. So I might want to do this. I'll create a new file. I'll call it to-do service.js. And in this to-do service, I can have multiple functions. So I can have the first function to save user or save new to-do. So save new to-do. This save new to-do will accept a title and a description, right? Then I can have another one. Of course, this would be async. This second one would be to maybe send email or send to do created email, right? And then, of course, this would accept maybe an email, a subject, and an email, a subject, a body, something like that. Then what else do you want to do? So let's come back here to our controller, to our to-do controller. I think I'll just divide my screen into two. So the first one is to save this to-do, right? So the first is to save the to-do, and then the second one would be to maybe send an email, and then the third one would be to do this. So you might want to say you want to import those two, right? You might want to import those two. So you would say, sorry, save new to do, and that's okay. So the first thing you would want to do is to save the to do. So you want to copy this line of code. You want to copy this line of code and return the new to do. You can even just basically just say return that new to do that is being saved. Then the second line of code would be to send the email. So you have like transporter.send email. So this from can be there. So this would be to. So this would be the to. Then the subject can come from there, can come from the subject. Then the body can, you can actually have a body, and since you have a description and title, instead of having body here, you could have title and description. Title and description that way. Or if you still want to pass in a body, because the reason I'm not passing body here is because we already know what we are doing here, right? If you want to send an email, right, and you want to define your body the way you want to define it, you just call transporter.send email. But if you want to send a to-do created email, then you need to have a title and description to pass to this guy here. Okay. Then once you do that, the next thing you want to do is like the to-do should be sent successfully. So like these are like the two services that are required for the controller to add a new to-do, right? Then the next thing you want to do is you want to const that should be equals to require. Then you say you're requiring what? Dot slash services slash please load to do services, and then you would want to import save new to do, and then send the to do created email. So while you're adding new to do, you could just say instead of this line of code, right? Instead of that line of code, you want to say const new to do equals to save new to do. And save new to do just accepts a title and a description, right? Then after that, of course, this will be an await. Then the next thing you want to do is you want to send the email. So you'd say await send to do created email, and then you say so the two, you can actually pass them here, like maybe this way. You want to pass them that way, subject, then title, description, right? Some people also, some people do it this way, right? And some people do it this way, right? While some people would just, rather than having two functions they are calling, they have one central function, and okay, let me do it. This is one way. The other way some people do it is, right, they can have maybe this is add new to do. So instead of having these two functions call themselves there, and this is like, should I say, the standard way. The third way to do it is you can have something like this. Add async function add new to do service. Then add new to do service would be like this. You would also export it. In fact, this is like, I think this is the standard way of actually doing it. The first, so you then want to do, this one will accept title, description, of course. Then here, what you will just simply do is, rather than all these things here, you just say const. So let me just go up and import it. So you don't need these two again. If you're doing it this way, I want to show you. So you just say add new to do service. Then here you just come and say new to do. New to do should be equals to await that service. We have title, we have description. Right. You just have that. Then in this add new to do service, what you will now do is const new to do should be equals to save new to do. Save new to do with the same title and description here. So you just say title, description, and then after that, you still call the send email here. So you say send to do created email, then that would accept a tool, which is this guy. It will accept a subject. It will accept a title and description again. So instead of request the body dot title, it will be title. Request the body dot description, it will be description. Okay. Title, description. So this, that, then you have title, description. Then at the end of the day, you return the new to do. Right. So now, what's the advantage of doing it this way is that, one, if I want to save to do and I just want to only save to do somewhere else, rather than writing the logic to save the to do, I can just call save to do there. If I want to only send a created email, maybe if there's another method I'm using to save to do, or I just want to send a to do created email or resend a to do created email, I can just call this. But if I still want to do everything again, I can call this particular one somewhere else, and I can also call it here when I'm adding a new to do. So this service is for this new to do here, and this service can also be used somewhere else because this service is just an ordinary function. It's like one function. So I can use it somewhere else. And then if I don't want to use the service directly, but I want to use the components of that particular service, I can still, call it or use it. Okay. So that's one. This is a way to do it, and you can also do it for others. So it may be like this view single to do, right? You can just write, maybe you can create a service to maybe view to do service. So maybe something like view to do service. This one should be create to do service or something like that. You can have view to do service, and then instead of calling this to do directly here inside this controller, you call it inside that service, and then of course, you can wrap the logic. You can wrap these two logic inside inside the service. So the service should try to get a to do, should check if the to do exists. So let's do it, Sha. Let's do it. Let me do it for that one also. So I'll just say view to do service. JS. So in the view to do service now, I'll then say function what is here. So I'll say view to do, or maybe view single to do service. You can, your naming convention depends on you. So this would accept an ID. Then I'll just simply copy this to here. Right? I could simply copy this to here. And now this is another thing. Now, in here, you're not going to be using res dot whatever. Rather, you might want to be returning an object. So instead of maybe returning returning this, what you rather want to write here is, sorry, you rather want to do this. Rather want to do this, maybe you'd say status of 400, then message not to do. Okay, rather than do this, you say, let me just keep it there. So instead of doing this, you rather return that. Else you might want to or some people, what they do is maybe instead of status they can say any error true. Rather, instead of using maybe a status, they might use maybe something like any error. Then if there is a to do, they might want to do this, return any error false, and then maybe message or detail. Maybe it could be detail. Detail would be the to do. Something like that. Then, so here, if you've written that already, you want to export. You want to export it. Sorry, I'm using Pascal case here. I'm supposed to use camel case. So view single to do service. You do the same thing again. You come here. You just say view with view to do service, and then of course you should have that. Then down there where you're viewing a single service, you might want to remove this, and then you say to do should be equals to view to do service, and you pass the ID. View single to do service, you pass the ID here, right? And you can also check if the to do, maybe you'd say if there's any error, if to do dot okay, sorry, it's supposed to be an await here. So if to do dot any error, I think it should appear. Yeah. So I'm using detail and details. So if there is any error on the to do, then you might want to res.status. The res.status should be to do Now, if you're returning 400, you're returning status, for example, sorry, status of 200, something like this. You could say if there's any error, then you want to do res.status should be to do dot status and then dot send, and then you want to say maybe the detail or response should be to do dot detail. Okay, so this way, this viewing a single to do service can be reused. So instead of, let's say maybe if you want to fetch to do again, maybe in another route, you don't need to start sitting down to write this find by ID, check if it is empty, and if it's empty, do this. If it's not empty, you just call this service and pass the ID of the to do you want. Then you do your own checking again, like if it's in fact, you don't even need to do any checking again. You just, all you need to do basically is, in fact, you don't even need to worry yourself too much. Just, rather than do this, just do that. Just say response.status is the to do status, and then the response.detail is the detail there. So if the to do doesn't exist, it will automatically send let's say 404. Sorry, it will just automatically send 404, and then the detail, the value of the detail is to do, not to do found. But if the to do exists, it will then send a status of 200, and then the response will be the to do itself. So that way, right, it is now easy for you to, if there's maybe any other place that I need to view a particular single to do. So let me check. Okay, so now this place that I have to do does not exist. Like I'm checking if the to do exists, right? Instead of doing this thing, I can just come here, remove this part. I can remove that part and say, I can say const to do should be equals, or to do value should be equals to await view single to do. Service. Then I pass the ID. Right? But now passing this ID, so passing this ID, if the to do does not exist, so you still want to do this. If there is no, if there is no, okay, you could say if to do dot status is not equals to 200, then you could then say maybe to do not found or something. If it's not equals to that, you can say return res.send, right? res.send, res.status. So the status would be to do dot status, and then the send here is going to be, sorry, this is supposed to be if to do value dot status, then this is supposed to be to do value dot status, and then here you have results should be equals to, result should be to do value dot detail. So if it's not 200, then the return here, but the return should, or let me still break this down, maybe like this. So you can have rest.status dot send that way. So rest.status is going to be the status that is sent back. If it's not 200, then the result here is going to be that detail, right? Then this on its own can be maybe another, in fact, rather than doing this here, right, this upload to do status can have its own service, right? Then that service will call this view to do service and also the service to update. Okay, so it might, I know, is it confusing? Does it feel confusing? Does it look confusing to you guys? Does it look should I say not easy to understand also? So you can also have like updates to do service, which will call view single service and then call the piece of code to update this service also, something like that. Does it make sense to you guys? Does it make sense? Okay. Yeah, so that's yeah, I can remember now. That's I mentioned something about DDD. So that's design, is it domain driven design? Yeah. Yeah, so you split components on front end. The same way you split components on front end so that they can be reusable, right? That's the same way services are on the back end. So you have services that are reusable on the back end. Okay. So with this way of right coding, or with this way of writing it, we still have the MVC pattern, but the MVC pattern is further broken down into service. But we also have another pattern named DDD. And Lord of Jesus, I have to explain I have to explain that pattern to you guys. And I'm going to do that actually. So I'm going to spin up a brand new project. I'm going to spin up a brand new project. I'll show you. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll share for people that have forgotten how to spin up new projects. This is your last chance to learn how to spin it up. But I'm going to spin it up using Express Generator. So remember that we installed Express Generator some time ago. So I'll call it DD design. So it has finished creating it. I would cd into DD design. That's change directory into DD design, npm install. Oh, then while this is installing, I just remembered something. I also remember that I told you guys that there is a way to actually do error handling, right? There's a way to do error handling, and Matilda reminded me yesterday on that. Okay, so now just give me some few minutes. Now, that has to do with this. Now, the way you're already handling error is okay, but there are some errors that might skip, that might pass you. Now, this is the proper way to handle it, and I'm stealing this code from the new project that I just created, and I'll show you. So this is what you would do. I'll just, because typing this code is just going to take another time. So you just paste this code here. So this first one here is to handle if there is any, in fact, here, instead of maybe writing 404, you can, well, just leave it that way. But this particular line of code is to catch any 404, right? It will catch, apart from any 404, okay, yeah, catch 404 and what is it saying? Catch 404 and forward to error handler. So, Isaac, you're asking how I'm spinning a new project. What I just typed is express and the name of the project. And you can do it by opening a new terminal or by writing it on your VS Code terminal. Either ways will work. Okay? Either ways will work. But this is still the former project. I will take it to the new project. Now, look. These two middlewares here are going to handle any error that occurs. Okay? Now, you must have seen this render. Now, it's not actually good for you to. Now, this render is mainly used if you're writing, if your front end is also on Express.js, because it's possible to write front end on Express.js. In fact, it's possible to write your whole front end and back end on Express.js in such a way that Express.js will be the one to render your front end. That's Express.js will be sending the HTML file to front end, right? You can do that by writing your normal front end on Express. You will put it in the public folder, or another way of doing it is that you can configure what is called a templating engine. So if you want to render the output of a templating engine, that's when you use rest.render. While this error here is going to be the name of the file you want to render. So if the name of the file is maybe index.jade, for example, you write index here. So it's going to render index for you, but we are not rendering files, we are sending JSON, right? So you want to say JSON or res.send, but this send is general. Send can be used to send anything actually, like any text, whether is or any text. Is it JSON? Is it normal text and the rest? They send. If you want to send file, like if you want to send index, maybe an HTML file to front, and you will say send file. Abi, am I mistaken? They send file. Don't mind this thing. They send file actually. Okay. Then so here you want to do send, and then yeah, you want to also check for sha rest.this is this. Okay, so what is happening here? What is happening here is just simply checking if the environment is a development environment, then you can send the error back. But if it is a production environment, you should not send the error back or let the user not see your stack trace. Rather, you should send an empty object. So you can actually just still copy this line of code again and put here. You can say error, bagam, Short and simple. So if you push this code now online and an error occurs on the back end, it will just send these brackets, right? Another thing you can do at this point is you can console.log the error, right? Now, all these things we've written here, how do we now start using them? Remember that this is a middleware. Let's come back to this point where we are using to do. Now, let me take, for example, this update to do status. I want this update to do status to work with this error handler. If there is an error that I did not catch, this is what I'm going to do. I will say try catch. I'll say try catch. That's number one. Number two, I'm going to write the next. Now, I'm going to convert all the endpoints. All the controllers for the endpoints to behave like middlewares. So now this is what I'm going to do. I'll now come to the bottom here, right? Then I'll move everything into this try block of code. So now what I'm trying to say is I want to try to do all these things in this try block of code. I want to try to, validate the schema. I want to try to fetch or try to call this function. I want to try to do all these things. Now, if any of these things fail, maybe for example, if trying to query the to-do model to find and update this particular to-do with this ID fails, if by any chance it fails and I did not catch that failure, I did not catch the reason why it failed to show it to the user, then this is what I want to do. I'll then want to write next. Then I'll pass the error there. But with this line of code, there are two things that will happen to your back end. Number one, if there is an unexpected issue that happens in your try statement, your back end is not going to crash. Your backend will send the error because this catch has caught that error, but your backend is not going to crash. But if you did not wrap, like for example, you see this delete, right? That I did not wrap in any try and catch. Since this delete is not wrapped in a try and catch, if something fails in this delete, while the delete is trying to, maybe delete a particular to-do, if something fails in this to-do, it's going to crash the back end. It's going to crash the server because it's not wrapped in a try and catch. But if I now wrap this delete to do in a try and catch, any error that occurs that I am not catching or I'm not looking at, in the try statement, right, or in the try block, will be caught in the catch and it will be handled properly. So if what I do when I'm writing my controllers for backend is I wrap each and every controller in a try and catch. So I come here, I'll say try, catch. Then I'll push everything that has to do with this controller. I'll push everything inside the try. Then here for the catch, I'll just say next. Then I'll come here and say next, and I'm passing the error. Now, what does this do? Once the error happens and you pass it to next will now call from here, from this delete controller, for example. This next will just call, or this next will look first. This next will check the router. So let's come here. It will first check the delete router, that after this delete, is there any other middleware? If there's no other middleware, it's going to come back to call this application.use. Then this application.use will still, since it's not a 404 error, it's going to still pass it again down to this particular line of code, the error handler code. And then this error handler pattern, it will still, it will then do its logic to check, is this person on a development environment? If the person is on a development environment, oh yeah, log out, send back the person the error message, then log out the error. The error is supposed to be ERR, not ERROR. See it here. This error is what we are actually particular about. So log it out and do everything. You get. But if you don't wrap it in a try and catch, most times you notice that maybe you send a request to your server, and once that request fails, your server crashes, right? My server doesn't crash, no matter what the error you send. In fact, so let me tell you an experience I had. I finished deploying a server for a client, and then we started seeing very strange requests. Like it was more like someone was trying to probe the backend to hack it. We're seeing requests, maybe someone sending a request to /.env, someone sending a request to /public/env, and these routes don't exist. And then the person also sent requests. I don't know if it was a person or a bot, but the person was sending like different requests to different routes. And most times the response to these routes are like maybe 400, or sometimes the route actually would have crashed. But I wrapped it in a try and catch. So when those things was going on, the responses were coming back like, if it's supposed to send back maybe a stack trace, it should just send back an empty object. You understand? So there was nothing whether it was a hacker, there was nothing the person would use to, maybe trace to maybe view the stack trace of the backend. That's number one. Then number two, the backend wasn't crashing. No matter how many requests this person was sending to look for what he can use to maybe extract details from the backend, right? The backend wasn't crashing. It was always up and running. It's never crashed, and then they will call me to say, oh, Victor, server don't crash. Oh, please, can you start it again? No, it was just there up and running. You get. So doing this will save you a whole lot of stress. Doing this, wrapping in try and catch, and then doing this stuff, having this error handler will save you a lot of stress. Okay. Then another thing, so let's go to the new project I just spinned up. Yeah, PDD design. So, ladies and gentlemen, I had to steal from myself. This is where I copied the code actually. If there's error, so this is the project I just spinned up on my own, right? So which has everything here. This create error, this is that, and that. But then you have the use function. If this is an error, or what's use error, and the rest, see it here. But then I just need to change this to send, right? Sometimes you don't even need to send any error message to the back end. Like you can just see an error of code. Sorry, to the front end, you can just see an error of code. Let the front end just see that an error of code. The front end should tell the back end that see, I was trying to make a request to this place and it did not show me any message, but it showed an error of code. So check it out. So the back end developer will now come and replicate what the front end developer was saying, and then of course there will be a console.log here. So the backend developer, sometimes this error here, right? The developer can view it from the production log or from the staging log, like that log that you saw on render now. Some people this is what they do: send email. The subject can be maybe error occurred. Then the body would be maybe JSON.stringify the error. So they receive the error. As soon as an error occurs on the back end, they receive it as an email and they can see the full, stack trace of that email, of that error, that okay, this is what this person was doing, this is the error, and then they can now maybe like resolve it or something, you see. So you can log out the error, you can send it to yourself as an email. So maybe the email here could be the developer's email. It can be like the developer's email and the rest. So you can just send that down there. I think I should also remove this one. Let it just be there though. But so so with DDD, rather than having something like this, you might have something, instead of having views, routes, and the rest, you might have something like this. Maybe you can call it domains, but then the domain, you can have something like auths. Then inside this auths, you have a file like auths controller.js. Then you can have inside this auth, you can have auth services.js. Then you can have the model, right? So that model we created as schema. You can have maybe a file called user models.js, right? Some people do that. Some people do this. Some people still decide that the models should remain one place, right? So maybe you could just have maybe a new folder called models. Then maybe you have your auth model inside here. Okay, but now you have like an auth listing which contains your controller, your services. Maybe it could contain tests. Maybe auth auth.test.js. You get. Then you can have maybe another domain which would be like your to-do domain. So this to-do domain would have its own to-do controller.js. Maybe I should just name the service instead of services. Then you have your own folder, file, we call it to do service.js. You have your to do test.js, right? With this way of structuring everything that has to do with auth, right? Even if you're writing TypeScript, you then have something like auth maybe interfaces.ts. Maybe if you're using interfaces, right? You have a folder for interface and the rest, so you have your auth, you have your to do, and the rest, something like this. So this way of arranging the files, right, where instead of you having a central place where you have all the controllers, a central place where you have maybe services, you have a domain, and the domain has everything that has to do with it, its controller and its service and the rest. This is like a DDD approach, right? So you can have more domains. So if you want to spin up a new domain, in fact, this is if you've written Nest.js, before, right? You notice that it follows this same pattern. It follows the same pattern where you have the different domains, and then you can also update those domains and the rest. Okay. So is there any question so far? Is there anybody that has any question or yeah, any question? So DDD or NVC design paradigm depends on you, whichever one you want to use, right? If you're comfortable with uh, using the DDD approach, right? Having everything in its own domain, fine. If you want to use the MVC approach, it's also fine. There are some projects that would be better suited if it's in the using the DDD approach rather than the MVC approach. Sometimes these domains could be users. Maybe you can have like domains could be admin domain. Or it might not even be domain here. This might actually it might be maybe named as app or not domain, might be app. And then you have all the list of domains inside that app. So anyone actually, right? But there are some projects that require that you like will be better suited to use DDD than to use MVC. Okay, there are some projects like that. So, any question so far? Any question? Okay, so in the absence of any question, okay, so yeah, if it's not concerning the task, right, or your grading, you can ask.
Okay, please, I want to ask about the to-do test, how they control it. The test.js, is it the place in which you are going to give the JavaScript, like the work, the ability to test the code that we do?
Okay, okay, so this test here that is being written here is to test the services, right, that are writing that particular code. It's to test the controller, but of course the controllers are going to still be linked to the services. So if you have maybe for this to do controller, you have maybe you have a forward slash get. Okay, so this is where you write the controller, like your route. This is where you write your route dot get maybe to do and the rest, maybe to do's, maybe post for your to do's and the rest. You write it here, but then you want to do this your RAQ, RAS, next. Then here is where you then do your try catch. You do your try catch, you say next, error. Then here is where you call your service. So maybe the service is maybe you say const results should be equals to maybe add to do service, right? The add to do service, you pass in whatever detail you're to pass in. Then you can say maybe res dot send maybe result should be result dot detail, while the status here should be result dot status, maybe something like that. If the because this you should probably be returning a result object with that contains status and all these things, you know. Then your test will now test for that forward slash. You say describe describe um describe that you should test login. I'll be sure you should test adding maybe getting a to do, adding a to do, updating and deleting a to do. Then you start your test. You start your test basically. You say, maybe add a new to do, async, whatever, async, then your test. Do the same thing for maybe get a to do. And the rest, you now all these tests will be for whatever service you're writing. And remember that test, you're not just writing test for the best case scenario. You want to check, maybe you get a to do, then you might want to probably maybe get a to do that does not exist. Maybe get a to do that does not exist. To see if it is going to send you back a 200 or a 404 and the rest. But everything about this test is going to be about what you're writing in your controller for the to do. While the auth test is going to be everything that has to do with the controllers and services for your auth test. Like even these auth tests, for example, you might have a service here that doesn't have anything to do with maybe your auth controller. You will still test it inside this test, and the rest. So I hope I've been able to answer your question. Udwa, do you have another question?
Yes, I want to ask the REQ, RES, and EMV that was shown there. This does it mean request and other things like that?
So REQ is for the request. Okay, for example, REQ is for request. So this REQ represents the request that is coming in from the front end, right? Or from the client to you. This RES is an object that can be used to respond to that request. While this next is what calls the next, like the next, what's it being called again? This next is actually a function, right? It's used to call the next middleware, right? And the next in the middleware might be in that route, or it might be a general middleware. So, and it's not by must, you must name it REQ, RES. You can name this request. You can name it response. But make sure that as you're naming it like this, you're also updating it here, that the response.status is this, and then the rest. So whether you want to name it RA and RQ, maybe you want to name it like this, RA and RQ. RQ, RA. It's still fine. But you have to, but the popular way to actually name it is the REQ, RAS, like the way I did before. This is the very popular way. You always see this in a lot of code bases, right? You always see this in a lot of code bases. But some people also do the normal one I just did. People still do this one very well. Okay, ask your question, Udwa.
So the model, are we going to be training like the computer to know what we want to do? Because I'm seeing model in the do design fair.
Okay, so Udwa, I have a question. Is this the first time you're attending our class?
Yes, it's the first time I'm attending it live.
Wow, nice. Okay, so if you've been following the previous lectures, right, you will definitely know what a model is used to do, right? You definitely know what the model is used to do. I'm not training AI. This is like backend development, not AI. So these models, I know models in terms of AI means like what you use to train an AI and the rest, or in machine learning, right? But here, this model is used for the database, how you structure your database. That's what the auth model here is used for. Is used to structure your the database, because MongoDB doesn't accept structuring of the database on the database level. So that structure for your database can be done at the application level, right? MongoDB doesn't care about your structure. It's your application that you're writing, that you're actually doing the structuring. So that's where Mongoose comes in. So Mongoose helps you enforce a particular structure, right? But if you use MongoDB driver directly on your back-end application, I don't think you need to structure it, unless you want to write your own structure for how data should be saved on the back end, right? Then you can do that. Okay. So in fact, if you don't want to use Mongoose and you want to use Mongo driver directly, what you might want to do is, well, you can just use Joy before saving. You just use Joy, check the structure before giving it to the MongoDB driver to save it for you. But thanks to Mongoose, right, we have a way to actually structure and save data. And if you're using Python, there is a library called Augmantic. So Augmantic allows you to do similar things to what Mongoose is doing. So Mongoose helps you enforce or create and enforce that structure on the application level for JavaScript, while Augmantic helps you do similar thing for Python. Okay, so is there any other question?
My last question is that can I use that authentic for JavaScript too? And I want to also ask whether they can combine one or two, more than two JavaScript framework on a single project, like one for the security aspect, one for the database aspect, one for the authentication. For example, let's say Next.js for the security, then after Node.js the authentication, and then Vue.js for maybe the templates and other things like that.
Okay, I get your question. So this is the thing, right? There are what is called frameworks and there are what is called libraries, right? Right? Now, Express is the framework for backend. You can't use two backend frameworks on one particular project, like saying you're using you're using Nest.js and you're using Express.js on a particular project at the same time. That will not work, because the same thing Express.js is doing is similar to what Nest.js is doing. Nest.js has what is called dependency injection, but that's another topic for another day. But you can't do the same thing. Like you can't use both. Sorry, you can't use both on the same, on the same code base. So it's either you're using Express.js and then you're using other things for security and the rest, or you're using Nest.js and then you're using maybe the security recommended features for Nest.js, right? So if you're talking of security, you're going to use JWT, or you can use Passport.js. It's what is called Passport.js. You can use Passport.js for your authentication, authorization, and everything. Then you can't use Augmantic on JavaScript, no, because Augmantic was designed for Python. It was written in Python, it was designed for Python. So you cannot do NPM unless unless there is an alternative, maybe unless there is Augmantic for JavaScript. That is when you can use Augmantic on your JavaScript. But Augmantic just copies what Mongoose is doing. So you have Augmantic, you have Mongoose for your database schema. If you're using if you don't want to use Mongoose, you can use Prisma. Prisma is also there, and the rest. You can use Prisma, you can use Sequelize or Type ORM. There's Type ORM, there's Sequelize. You can use any of that for your database. And then know that if you're using Sequelize, then you're actually going for a SQL database. That's an SQL database. If you're using Mongoose, you're going for NoSQL database, which is MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database. If you're going for Prisma, then Prisma is all weather, like it's all round. If you want to use it for a NoSQL database, then you can actually configure it to work with a NoSQL database. If you want to use Prisma for a SQL database, you can also configure it to work with a SQL database. So the bottom line is that there are some combinations that you cannot do, right? You cannot do. There was a time someone tried to use React with Express. So when you spin up Express, it spins up React at the same time. There's a way to do that. There's a way to actually do that where the React and Express runs on one server. And then when you push to production, you use React. You use React to create the production build, and then you use Express to render it. It's possible, but using Express and maybe Express and Happy.js or Express and Andonis, for example, at the same time, no, right? Except in under the hood of that particular framework, there's a way to, or there's maybe that's availability or that feature. For example, Nest.js is built on top Express.js. So if you use Nest.js, you can use the Nest.js way of maybe accepting inputs from users or viewing the request body of a particular request from a particular request, for example, or you can use the express way of getting a request from a user to view it on Nest.js. Nest.js supports, so there's how you write your Nest.js, that you're using the Nest.js pattern to get request and then make response, and then someone else will write that same Nest.js but following the way that you or configure it to make it look like it is Express is writing, that you see this request response stuff there somehow. You get, so everything boils down to what is available on the framework. If there's a framework tomorrow that comes out and say it allows you to use Express and Happy.js on the same code base, wow. But if it's not available, right, you should know that can work out. And another thing is, you should also read and understand exactly how each of these frameworks work. Like you don't really need to know much of them, because if you know Express, for example, if you pick Next.js, there are things that will be similar, or Happy.js or Andonis.js, there are things that will be similar in those frameworks, right? There are things, there will still be requests, there will still be response, and rest. You get, so you need to read your frameworks or the frameworks you're using to understand it fully. What is available on this framework? What are the things I can do with it? What are the things I can build with it? What are the functions that I can call? How does middleware works here? What other feature does it have that makes it different from another framework? Okay, so that's the thing. But so that's framework. But if you're talking of libraries like Mongoose is a library. You can use Mongoose with, I don't know, you can install Mongoose on your project and use it. You can uninstall it and install something else to use for your driver. You get, and most times I've not really seen a database I've not seen a project that uses two databases at the same time. Like maybe uses a SQL and a NoSQL database. I've not really worked on that. I think you can actually do that, but I've not done it before, so I can't actually tell you that maybe that's a good practice or not. So I hope I've been able to answer your question. Good work.
So what you're trying to say is that The front-end terminology and back-end terminology of database or JavaScript can work, but two back-end terminology of JavaScript can't work.
Yeah. Now, if you're talking of putting your front end and your back end on the same port to run, on the same server to run, that configuration is not going to be straight. Like you have to configure it to work that way. It's not supported out of the hood. Like you just spin it up and it works. It has to be like you have to configure it. You have to like point the server to a particular place where it's supposed to. You can point it to a particular server of how do I put it? You can point it somewhere. You get like you can say, okay, Express, if they send a request to forward slash and you want to render the React build, this is the folder where it is. You have to render it and all those stuff like that. There's a way to configure it. Okay. And don't make the mistake of going, I've tried it before, so I'm telling you, it's not everything that works on backend that will work on front end. For example, you cannot install Mongoose on your front end and it will work. It will not work. Mongoose will not work on front end. Do you get? Axios can work on front end and on back end, but Mongoose will not work on your front end. There are some other libraries that you will try to use on your front end that will not work. There are some libraries that are just only for back end. It's just like, for example, you installing Tailwind, or no, let me not say Tailwind. Let me think of a library. Okay, let's say, for example, if you are installing Tailwind on the back end and you're not rendering any HTML from your back end, then what's the need of installing Tailwind on your back end, for example? You get, so know your library and know where it should work well at. Okay, is there any other question?
Yes, this one is about the front-end terminology. For Vue.js or React.js, when coding it, say a template that they use for the design, and therefore must it be need must Tailwind CSS and HTML with other things must be installed in that file that you are using React.js or Node.js or Vue.js that uses template code.
Sorry, I don't understand your question, but
What
what?
I'm trying what I'm trying to say is this. In Vue.js, when you want to start designing your production, you start with templates. But it is a must that as you're starting with templates, you must install Tailwind CSS and HTML inside that code, inside that file, so that it will run. Or do you just use
First,
the template?
first, you don't install HTML into your front-end project. Your front-end project, once you spin up your view, like everything that has to do with HTML, of course, it's rendered on your browser. It's your browser that understands whether you're writing HTML or not. If you're not writing HTML, then your browser doesn't understand it. It's your browser that does that, the understanding of is this HTML. Now, it's not by must that you must install Tailwind on. This is not even a front end class, right? But I just want to answer you. There's no need for it. It's not. There are people that write their whole front end and they don't use Tailwind. They can use Material UI throughout for their front end. Some people use Ant Design throughout. Some people use Sharp CDN. Some people use Chakra. So, and they might just use only Chakra. They don't use any other thing apart from Chakra. Some people might use Sharp CDN and maybe Tailwind. Some people might just use Sharp CDN alone. Some people might just use Ant Design alone. And that is it for that project. Like, so everything depends on you. If you're going, now it doesn't make sense for you to install Chakra on your back end. Like, what do you want to use Chakra on your back end for? You're just making your back end more heavy. So knowing the library you're supposed to use at a particular place, like for example, you can use Tailwind and Material UI on your front end. It will work well. In fact, Tailwind works easily with almost any library or any framework or any front end component framework, right? It works easily with any of them, right? So it depends on you. If you're someone that loves Tailwind and then loves maybe another framework and you want to use both, fine. If you're someone that you just like using only components framework, you don't like Tailwind, you like writing your CSS directly while you also use it alongside a framework, fine. You can use that. That works perfectly well. Is there any other question?
No, not for now. Thanks for answering my questions.
Okay, you're welcome. So, apart from you, is there any other person? Is there any other question from any other person? Okay, so in the absence of any other question, I think we can call it a day at this point. Thank you very much for joining today's class. And okay, Udrak, I have seen your message. I hope you're on Discord. Are you on Discord?
Yes, I'm on Discord.
Okay, all right, no problem. You can drop a message there.
I have already
Then,
addressed the message.
all right, okay, no problem. So, in the absence of any question, yeah, we would call it a day at this point. Thank you very much for joining. We'll have another class on Thursday. In case you think that class has finished, we'll have another class on Thursday. I think by that Thursday, I will talk mainly about how to do refresh token, access token, and how to generate it. And then there are some key things you should know about access token, refresh token, and generating it, and what are like the security, maybe the security, or why they are good security wise, and then what you should do maybe if you have your front end and back end on different servers, and how you're going to make them secure than the rest. I'll show that. I'll do that. All right, so I think that would be the last thing we'll do, and that will be in our next, class on Thursday, right? So by then we will do that, and I believe if you guys are equipped with that, then you have that confidence to build authentication systems that would scale. I think OAuth 2 can even come into. I think the next class should just be basically about authentication. I think OAuth 2 can even come in, where you can do login with Google and login with Facebook. I think I'll just do login with Google, and then we should do those two. We should do those two, login with Google, and then we should see how we can do access token, refresh token, stuff by next. Matilda is very happy about that. Okay. 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 So that will be our focus in the next class. Thank you for joining today's class, everybody. For people that couldn't stay on the class till the end, okay, yeah, for people that couldn't stay on the class till the end, or they were kicked out by the network, sorry about that. Come to Nigeria, you can actually, our network is stable, more stable, and the rest, um, right? Yeah, don't mind me, I'm just joking. So see you guys in the next class. Bye bye for now.